everybody. Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Annie and Kate. Hello, Annie.
Morning. Hey, everybody.
And welcome, Amy Coops.
Hello.
It's a real delight to get Amy on the podcast I wanted to get her on for ages, but we had clashing schedules and international time zone issues. So Amy is a journalist, a writer and editor at Croaky News. She's a social journalism collective for health, and she's also a junior doctor with the Victorian Rural Generalist Program, which I'm going to want to hear all about. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Finally made it work.
Yeah, yes. Now, the important thing, because I've had a hellish day, I'm drinking white wine, which Annie will disapprove of, but
I really will.
It's an elephant in the room, which seems strangely appropriate.
Excellent. Well, I am drinking a red. Can't drink white, sorry, do not approve. I'm drinking the Parson GSM from McLaren Vale. That's a nice very one. Nice.
You get a nod of approval from me, and Kate must try harder. I am in my Harry Potter mug vat of tea, as usual, because it is still only 20 to 10 in the morning here in England. And much as I would love to join you on that glass of red, Amy, even I can't quite kind of get over the idea of drinking before 10 o'clock in the morning.
Not even in European lockdown?
Or do you know what so Kate knows this, my father's been going through chemotherapy. So we've been in full isolation anyway. So people are going, how's lockdown? I'm like, honestly, I haven't really noticed. We've pretty much been in full isolation since September. So, you know, it's all fine. We live in a tiny little village in the north of England. We've got the middle of a polar vortex thing going on right now. So it's been snowing pretty much solidly for the last 4 days. And Kate also knows I hate snow. It is terribly inconvenient. And Kate loves snow. So, you know.
We're in the wrong places. We need to swap.
Clearly. And you'd be drinking wine if you were here.
Soon.
It's not long now till you come back, though, is it?
Yeah, fly 2 weeks on Monday. Not that I'm counting at all.
Has it cost you an absolute packet to come home?
Well, because when I flew, because I booked a return flight, obviously, when I left Australia, so it was already booked. I will freely admit that I have the pleasure of flying business class, which makes things slightly more predictable when it comes to flying. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't cheap, but hey, when you got to get home to help your dad through chemo, that's what you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So should we start off with a couple of questions?
I'll let you go first.
Fire away.
So this is one of my favorite ones, Amy. So what do you wish you could go back and tell your former self that you know now that you wish you knew back then?
What former self are we talking about? How far back are we talking?
I think let's go with sort of university days.
Oh, university is in like the first time I went to university, yes, or the most recent time I went to university. I would say so many things to myself back then. One of them would be mohawks are a terrible idea. Just don't do a mohawk. I was really into the mohawk, and looking back at pictures of it now, it just was bad. It really was bad. But
hey, if it makes you feel any better, I actually did have bleached sort of blonde permed hair at one point. Again, no, it didn't look good.
I've also done the bleaching, terrible, like not with my complexion at all. Like I just look so swarthy and the roots are just ridiculous. You know, some people can carry off bleach. I just can't. Anyway, lots of sartorial poor choices back in those days. I really liked to dress in like op shop, exclusively men's op shop clothes, and had lots of facial piercings. And none of that now I find particularly appealing. But like to be more profound and not to focus so much on the cosmetic, I reckon I would say to myself, everything will work out in the end. Like I think that it's a really trite thing to say, but I think when you're young and you're finding your place in the world, I think I certainly went through periods of time where I thought, you know, I was never going to be, not to get where I wanted to be, but I was never going to get to a place where I was happy with where I was. You know, I think lots of my early life, and I would say right through to that, you know, into my 30s, my life is very much characterized by striving. And I felt that I couldn't be happy unless I was looking to the next big thing to do. And I've come to find in my old age, obviously I'm not old at all, but like in my middle life, I've come to find much more like comfort in stillness. I'm really enjoying just being back at work, and temporarily, this sounds silly because I've just started working as a doctor, but like I'm in a lull, so to speak. Like I'm just enjoying learning a new, you know, way of working, and, you know, a new place of work, and constantly being challenged, but I'm not, for the moment, not looking ahead, which is what I feel like I've been doing since like forever. What am I going to do next? Where am I going to go? You know, never being satisfied with where I was. And I'm finally in a place in my life, and I don't know how long this will last, but I hope it's kind of a permanent, semi-permanent state anyway, of just enjoying where I am. And so I think I'd say to my young, very hard striving self that you'll get where you're meant to be, and not that it's fated, but like to have a bit more trust in the world turning in the ways that it's meant to. I think that's really good advice I've given to like younger colleagues who I think, I don't know, it sounds silly, but I think when you've lived a few lives, and I feel like I'm a cat that's lived approximately at least 5 lives by now, I think there's something really nice in just stopping and enjoying, like, you know, smelling the roses or whatever you want to say. And, you know, there's plenty of time to achieve all the things you want to, and you'll discuss like the things that you'll actually really love, and the things that you'll cherish are the things that have happened along the way, not the place that you've ended up necessarily. I don't know. That sounds really.
No,
really...
it doesn't. It sounds, a friend of mine actually says a phrase that he actually got from his father, which is, don't hurry, don't worry, and smell the flowers along the way.
I think, you know, it's that whole, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And I feel like the older that you get, the more that you realize that, because I guess that life takes you off on certain kind of tangents, and you realize that it didn't actually ever matter where you were going, except for in the sense that perhaps it sent you off on those tangents that have turned out to be, you know, fortuitous or very special, or, you know, life-changing in a way.
Love that.
That was a really fascinating answer.
Oh no. What do people normally say?
Because, well, we haven't asked that question for a while. It's interesting because I first met you on Twitter, as I meet most people in my life, and you were working as a journalist. And then I remember being really surprised to discover that you were a med student suddenly.
Yeah, that was a really common response. Like, I remember telling people, particularly close friends, because I kind of went about it on the sly, because I didn't know if I was going to get in. Like, it was a very big thing to go for, to sit the entrance exams and to even think about doing it. So I really didn't tell anyone, like, while I was kind of going through the process of applying and sitting the exam and all that stuff. And then kind of when I got in and started telling people that I was going to go to med school, you know, people were kind of like, what? You? How? Why? Like, what? And I don't know, it's really fascinating. It was an interesting insight into what I guess people thought of me or perceived of me. And this was even people who were like quite close friends of mine, who were genuinely like just couldn't get their head around why I would want to do that, or that that was something that kind of fitted into their idea of who I was. And I think I really have, with hindsight, I think have been very defined in that time in my life by being a journalist, you know, by being...
Well, it's a perfectly good career for most people.
Most people? Well, I'm not most people. I don't know. Look, yeah, this is a whole other conversation about like why I needed to get out of journalism. But, you know, it's true. Like I didn't leave journalism because I didn't like it anymore. I still love journalism now, and I loved
You can't
news.
help writing.
Yeah, I will never not write. You know, like writing is my way of being in the world and of processing the world and understanding, you know, making sense of it all. And I think particularly, you know, as I go further on in my medical career, it will be something that will be an important thing for me, you know, for myself at least, if not finding some other ways in which to use that kind of previous life and previous skills and combine the two worlds in some way. But I think journalism's like, and this is certainly my opinion, like having kind of come up through that world and spent 10 years like in the media, kind of the media universe, is like journalists are very defined by what they do and who they are. You know, like they're journalists. They're not just like, that's not just their job, that's who they are, you know, like, and that's how they think about the world. That's how they are in the world. It informs like everything that they do. And I think that was one of the reasons why my colleagues were also like some of, not my immediate colleagues necessarily, but friends of mine who worked in the industry were very kind of shell shocked that I would do that. And I think it was not just about like that you would do such a huge about face professionally, but that you would like turn away from journalism in a sense, you know, and then you were turning away from this whole person that you were, and
It's
this whole
almost
world
like you were leaving a
in.
cult.
Shh.
No, but it is kind of a vocation, so you can imagine why that happens.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I don't know, it's a rarefied profession in some ways, you know. Certainly journalists, I think perceptions of what they do, not all journalists, but lots of journalists, is that it's very noble what they do, you know, and it's at the fourth estate and it's part of democracy. And, you know, like I very strongly believed and still believe all those things, but I guess it is not cult-like, but I can see what you mean about like there are overlaps between those kind of paradigms, I suppose, you know, like, and I do think that it can, as we've seen, I think particularly last year, but in general, like it can lead to kind of groupthink, and, you know, journalists become very kind of defensive quite quickly, and defensive of other journalists as well. And, you know, it's almost as though like what they do is beyond reproach. And I personally think like mostly journalists in Australia anyway are not very good at taking criticism or engaging in that public conversation about like, you know, why some of the ways they do some of the things that they do are problematic, and the very kind of warranted like problems, I guess, that and tensions that people have come to see with the work and the way that the media and politics intersect. I think that the whole COVID has really cast a light on all of that in a way that hasn't perhaps happened before. Like, I think just because we've just seen so much kind of close contact media, politics, very important. The media's become very important in terms of, you know, like giving out information, but then it's also because it's been so kind of elevated in a way, it's really shown that kind of partisanship and the kind of secret relationships that go on and people's agendas, and, you know, like people being fed questions to ask in press conferences and that, and people have kind of not really liked what they've seen, like, you know, inside the sausage factory, so to speak. But I think it's really good and overdue and important that we have these conversations about, like, the media is not beyond reproach, you know, in the same way that politicians are not beyond reproach. Like, journalists must be held accountable for what they do, and they should be more transparent about, you know, their biases, their agendas, and I'm not talking in a personal sense, I'm more talking in a, like, you know, organizational. Yeah. I mean, we all know the leanings of different stables and organizations, but, you know, they pretend that they don't exist when we all know that they do. And it's one of the great kind of, you know, elephants in the room, to borrow from your kind of wine, that we should talk about. And I think we have been having those conversations, and it's quite refreshing. I really like it, but some of that is because I guess I'm a little bit on the outside of it now. And I think back to when I was working in news, that, you know, I was probably like a lot more insular and a lot more kind of enmeshed in the cult, so to speak, you know, and I think it's really nice to be a little bit on the outside of it. I still very passionately believe in the media and in what they do. and I still am very idealistic about it, I suppose, but I also very much can see it's got lots of problems with its business model and the way it does things. And I think,
but what about the role of media in a post-truth world where you can just make up your own reality now? Like,
I mean, this is like the defining question of our time, right? You know, it's how did Donald Trump come to power and how did he stay in power for so long? And, you know, like the great unraveling of American democracy, or perhaps it was already unraveled and it's just the sheens come off it. But it's, I don't know, it's, that's a big contested question. I don't know what the answer is to it, because, you know, I think from what we've seen, like the media doesn't know how to deal with it, right? Like we've seen it over and over again, not just Trump, but other politicians as well. Like it's a real kind of staple of post-truth politics and the fourth estate now, where it's sort of like, you know, it's a bit of brinksmanship goes on where they sort of just say whatever the hell they want to, and they just wait for someone to call them on it, and then someone will call them on it, and they'll just, I mean, this wasn't so much a post-truth thing, but we saw it this week with Greg Hunt and the whole, you know, emblazoning COVID vaccine with the Liberal Party. And then when he got called on that, which was very appropriate and I thought like warranted, and I was glad someone called him on it, he then turned around like and had ad hominem attacks. And I think that's also what we have seen so much of, you know, like just attacking journalists and, you know, accusing them of biases, which of course exist, but like falsely accusing them of biases, I guess, or like using that, like weaponizing that to undermine their credibility. I think, yeah, I've found that really difficult to handle, watching that play out in real time over, you know, several years of Trump and before that, and seeing it in this country as well. Like I think Morrison does it, you know, definitely. I think Tony Abbott really kind of started that. I remember that was the beginning of the end.
Tony Abbott is responsible for all the evil in Australia.
I mean,
I blame it all on him.
A lot of it.
You said it, not me, but
no, he's evil.
I mean,
I'm
also
a liberal,
this,
and I think he's evil.
You're a
he's evil
liberal.
as well because nobody needed to see him in Budgie Smugglers.
Oh
Literally,
my gosh.
none of us needed to see
That
that.
was, to me, that was the least offensive thing he ever did, wearing Budgie Smugglers. Like he is one of the people who is like one of the individuals who is responsible for me just being like, I'm disgusted with this and leaving news reporting, because I just couldn't participate in that ecosystem anymore, that exact ecosystem that you're talking about. You know, he started doing this stuff of just kind of saying absolute bullshit, and the press gallery kind of not calling him on it. Like, and even though I was in the foreign press corps at the time, so I wasn't in the domestic media, and I wasn't kind of, I guess, part of the direct interactions, you know, of that stuff. But even indirectly, just being part of the press and having to report on him and his goings on, you know, from an international point of view, I felt so dirty, and I also felt really helpless, you know, and I could see that it doesn't matter really how many people call these people out on what they're saying. Like there are no consequences. I don't think we live in a post-truth world. I think we live in a post-consequences world, you know, or the consequences are so delayed. So the only consequences there are going to be for someone like, you know, Liarbags Morrison is that he's going to get voted out. But, you know, this happens on several year cycles. So he's like home free, and then he's just got to figure out some palatable lie to tell at the next election campaign and shoehorn himself back in via Queensland. You know, like it's exactly what happens last year. See, I've like completely lost track of time. Last election. So I don't know. It's incredibly frustrating. And I remember kind of talking to people about this at the time when I was leaving journalism, about my frustrations, about how I didn't want to be part of it anymore, and I had ethical issues with participating in it. And they were sort of like, yeah, but that's a cop-out, you know, like we need people like you to stay in the system and like, you know, change it from the inside or whatever.
But
and it's just sort of...
Everyone seems to think if we just expose the truth, people will believe it. And they don't believe it anymore. No, but it doesn't matter.
it doesn't work. It's because there's no objective truth anymore, you know, like there's just subjective truths that people want to believe, and that's per whatever silo that you live in, whatever kind of side of politics you vote for, and, you know, whatever your personal peccadillos are. And, you know, like social media has absolutely perpetuated that kind of phenomenon where people can opt out of reality and live in a silo of absolute madness and utter insanity. But if everyone around you is just saying the same thing, then that's your reality. Like, it doesn't really matter. Everything's relative, right? So if you live in an echo chamber, then that is your reality, and that's incredibly scary. But also, like, that's the world that we live in, and I think we need to engage with the world as it is, not the world as we'd like it to be. And I think sometimes that's certainly what I saw with the American press and Trump. It was sort of like he changed the rules, he ripped up the rule book, but they were still playing by the old rules. You know, it was sort of like, oh, but if we just say this person's lying, then people will be like, what? He's lying? Oh my God, this is terrible.
And like David Dale with his fact checking in real time, it was just ridiculous. I want to ask my question now, because I want to ask you, what is the question that nobody ever asks you that you wish they would ask you?
Oh, gee, that's a good one. Question that I'd always like to be asked. Shit, I don't know. I've been asked so many questions over the years about every single aspect of my life.
Well, we don't have to.
Can I think about that one and come back to it?
Yeah. Oh, I want to.
All right. So whilst you're thinking about that, we've already talked a little bit about, you know, your frustrations and perhaps, you know, kind of disappointment, if you like, about your sort of journalism career. Was there a moment where it just pushed you over the edge? Was there just a moment where you went, fuck it, I can't do this anymore, I have to go and do something else? Or was it actually more the draw of wanting to go into this new career in medicine? So I was just wondering, what was it, push or pull, or a bit of both?
I think it was a bit of both. I think there were things that were pushing me out, and some of it was like, you know, the Abbott kind of ecosystem factor that I needed to get out of. But I think, and honestly, I really, looking back, I can see that I always questioned whether journalism was what I should do with my, you know, energy in the world and life and time. It never quite, I think, sat right with me. Like, I can just see, kind of looking back on my news career, like many moments where I sort of, you know, questioned what I was doing, and the value of what I was doing, I suppose, not so much like what I was doing. I did believe in the work, but I wondered if there was more for me in terms of, you know, meaning to other people, not so much to myself. Like, I think I always took a lot of meaning out of reporting and being a journalist, and always believed it was a valuable thing to do, but I wasn't sure that it was valuable to other people, and that became increasingly important to me. I think I went on this terrible string of disaster reporting, basically. It must have been around 2011 or something. There were just a series of events that I went to. So, like, went to the floods in Queensland, and then I went to the tsunami in Samoa, and there was something else, Christchurch as well. I went to the earthquake in Christchurch. And the thing I think that really struck me, particularly with those overseas jobs, was, you know, I was out there very much like on the front lines of like very traumatic things and seeing very traumatized people. And I remember seeing Médecins Sans Frontières and Red Cross people, you know, like in the disaster response, and more being drawn to the idea of being an actor in those situations where I was, rather than a witness. And it wasn't about like, you know, I wanted to have power, I wanted to have control, I wanted to have purpose, and I wanted to have meaning. And I think, you know, we can talk at length about the indirect kind of meaning of reporting on disasters. And of course, it's really important to bear witness. And of course, there are indirect, perhaps manifold more kind of impacts of reporting on a disaster, and, you know, people donating money and political action and all these kind of things, you know, as a result of your work. But it felt so intangible, you know, and then I see these people like doing very tangible kind of hands-on important work. And I think more and more I just thought, what if I could do that? You know, what if that was something that I could do? And I think I never believed, even after I got into med school, I never believed that I could actually do medicine, because, you know, it just seemed so out there in terms of like an academic pursuit, because I never thought of myself as being, I've always loved science, but I've always been absolutely terrible at maths. And I think I just had all these formative experiences at school that kind of informed this idea that, like, because I was a girl, I couldn't do science and maths because that's not a thing that girls kind of did, and I wasn't very good at it. And I was very good at other things, you know, I was very good at humanities, and I really loved writing, and I loved history, and I loved languages, and that just sort of seemed like, well, if you like those things, then of course you should go and, you know, do an arts degree. And, you know, I wanted to write stories. Like, it's always what I wanted to do. From the time I was a little kid, you know, I'd be writing stories in these little books. And the first award that I ever got when I was at school was for having a very vivid imagination and, you know, writing stories. And I won a prize for writing a poem when I was 6. I can still remember the poem. It was so good. And I think I couldn't believe when I finished school that
Hold on, you've got to do the poem.
It was so good. Bananas are yellow. They look like the moon. Look out, here comes a baboon. Come on, I was 6. Who knows the word baboon? And to rhyme, moon and baboon. Thank you. 6-year-old Amy.
6-year-old Amy had skills.
That was the peak of my career. I've never written anything as good as that ever.
One thing I want to know is what it was like going to med school. Like, was that a shock to your system?
Oh my God. I remember saying to someone when I learned about fMRI, which is functional MRI. So they can, like, you do an MRI, but they give you this tracer that can show you, like, basically metabolic activity in your brain and which parts of your brain kind of light up when you do different things, or they give you different stimulus, you know, like play you sounds or show you pictures or whatever. And I remember saying to someone after I learned about fMRI that I really wish that I'd done like fMRI when I first started med school, and done it then later on, because to me it was so huge. But I felt like the way that I thought had to change. You know, it was not just I had to learn all this new content. It was like I used to be a person who was very like felt my way around a problem, and was very like intuitive, and, you know, kind of like just kind of approach something backwards and would come to a solution. And medicine's not like that. It's very like, you know, if X, then Y. You need to be very methodical. You need to, like, you know, these are your differential diagnoses, and in order to rule those out, you need to do X, Y, Z. And you know, like, you need to think in a very kind of process-driven way, and, you know, like very deductive kind of reasoning rather than intuitive. And I found that super hard. I reckon that at the beginning of med school, that was the hardest thing for me, was to start.
So your fear of maths was completely wrong. It was your
I don't know. I kind of blagged my way through respiratory physiology, which requires a lot of maths and like equations and like laws and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, I just like learned enough to kind of gloss over that and get through that. I don't know. I don't think fundamentally I'm bad at maths. I think I just have an idea that I'm bad at it because I'm not as good at maths as I am at other things. But I'm very good at other things.
So many women feel the same. I do.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, I think it's because we're socialized to think that, you know. I remember having teachers when I was in primary school very much being like, essentially like telling my parents that I wasn't very good at maths. And I think the fundamental problem was my parents were in the military, and we moved around Australia in the, you know, bad old days before there was a national curriculum. And I just missed out on all this fundamental stuff because I moved from one state to another, and the curriculum was like completely disjointed. And I missed like all this fundamental maths. So I never caught it up, and I never kind of probably knew that I hadn't caught it up until it was too late. Like, I was in high school and we were doing like algebra and trigonometry or something, and I was like, what are you talking about? And like, things just didn't click for me. And I think if I hadn't had a disrupted education in that way, I probably would have been good at maths. And I think, like, it's not that my brain can't process maths, it's just that I just kind of was like, oh, that's too hard. Like, I can't be bothered. So anyway, I won't miscalculate your drug doses and stuff if that's what you're asking. Like, I can actually do some basic math. I start slightly getting freaked out by a few clinical things I have to do, like calculating iron infusions, which involves this whole kind of method and like formulas. And I'm like, it's okay. Just follow the protocol and just call the pharmacist when you need help.
Although I was about to say, on pharmacy TikTok, apparently they fix doctors' prescriptions all the time.
Oh my God, they so do. And they so hold our hands as baby doctors when we write prescriptions. Like, we got chucked into the ward. Like, the thing is, you learn all this, you learn a huge amount in med school. You learn all of this medicine and you learn all this diagnostic stuff, and you learn about, like common presentations and uncommon presentations and how to think about, like what's happening with people and how to figure it out. They don't teach you how to do all the basics of your actual job, which is like writing up fluid orders, writing up medicines. Like, we know what medicines to order, but like dosing and all this kind of stuff. And like, then there's the whole patients come in and say they're on all this list of medicines, and you're like, what the hell are these? And they're just like the trade names of the medicines. They're not the actual medicine. So then you have to get the handbook and be like, look it up on my phone, obviously, not in an actual book, but it's much more satisfying to do this. So yeah, they don't teach you all these things. And like, ordering a unit of blood to transfuse blood for someone. So like, I've had to have my hand held so many times in the past few weeks, just be like, this is the first time I've ever had to do this.
You are a baby doctor now,
Please
though.
help me.
That's good. But
I am.
you added a degree of difficulty to the med studies, though, didn't you?
Yeah, I went the really long way. Had 2 children in the middle of it. Kept working as a journalist. Didn't
So
sleep a lot.
how the hell did you manage to do all of those things at once? Like, that seems to be a degree of difficulty that I can't even contemplate.
Yeah, well, to circle back to the beginning of our talk, and remember I was saying about striving, like being something that really characterized my life. There's a degree of like, having, I will not say I'm ambitious, but I say I'm very driven, like if I have a goal, nothing will get in my way. I have to get there. And I guess I wanted to finish med school. That was one of my goals, but I also like wanted to have children. And the thing about going to med school when you're in your 30s is like, you don't have time to wait. Like, you've just kind of got to do it. And there's literally only worse and worse and worse times for a period of like 15 plus years before you then would have like a good window when you're a consultant.
No. And your fertility's declining. We've had Dr. Devorah Lieberman on the podcast talking about that. So you've got a narrow window if you want to do it.
People, I mean, look, I know surgical registrars who are like not partnered up, they're single, and they're like doing IVF and freezing their eggs because they're like, I don't want to interrupt my training, but I don't want to not have a child. So like, that's like a really, I wouldn't say like normalizing, but it's very much a thing that people do now, where it's like, oh yeah, well, I've got to finish my training, so I just put my fertility on ice. Like, it's a pretty, I wouldn't think.
Devorah reckons you need to freeze embryos.
You need to freeze embryos. Oh,
yeah.
You absolutely need to freeze embryos. Eggs have a terrible kind of rate of being thawed.
Yeah.
But then, like, so you're single and unpaired. Like, how do you, apart from like just using random donor sperm, how do you kind of make an embryo unless you've got a friend and you're sort of like, hey.
So that's another question though, because you and your partner didn't have any sperm in that equation, did you?
Wait, what?
Is this news to you, Amy?
we didn't what? No. So no, we did not have sperm in our direct relationship. So this was a whole other thing that went on at the beginning, or in the early years of med school, where we were sort of in the process of trying to find a donor. Like, we didn't want to use anonymous sperm, which lots of my friends have done. And I think it's a very personal choice in your relationship as to, the setup that you want to have, I suppose. Like, some people are very political about it. They're like, we very much don't want, a man in our lives. Sorry, I shouldn't do inverted commas, but you know what I mean? Like, they're like, our family is our family, and we don't want to have anything, in between us and the child or whatever. I guess and I'm really happy that my partner and I very strongly agreed on this, that we wanted a known donor, because we wanted the kids to have the option to know the person, I was very lucky to one of my very close friends, who was one of my very early girlfriends, had same-sex parents. And she kind of, I guess, obviously was a young adult who had grown up in a same-sex family, which was a very, at the time, you know, like this is the 1980s, like her parents were total pioneers in all these kind of areas to do with taking the government on, you know, with Medicare and things like this. So I kind of had her as this amazing role model in my life and someone that I could talk to about, you know, the whole thing. And she had a known donor who lived in the UK. And so she, you know, didn't have heaps to do with him, but she had the option to have a relationship with him if she wanted to. And, you know, they've sort of written letters to each other and stuff over the years. And I mean, her perspective is very much like, it doesn't really matter what you choose, it's how you execute it, I suppose, you know. And she's like, it's very much about the child having a narrative around who they are and their sense of place in the world. I guess for me, I don't really care about, you know, the genetics and the biology, but, you know, I think so many people, you know, yourself very strongly identify with one or the other of their genetic parents. And, you know, you can't discount genetics as a thing that does leave a fingerprint on your life in some way. And, you know, like it or not, sometimes one of you turns out very much like one of your parents. And I guess I was troubled by the idea that what if I had a child who didn't identify with me at all and just had this whole, I guess, you know, persona and things about them and, you know, aspirations and loves and talents that couldn't be explained within our family, like as in our non-biological, but like, you know, our chosen family. So we both really wanted to have the man, the sperm donor person, to be in the kids' lives. And, you know, it was a long process. It took several years actually for us to find someone. So I'd had a friend who for a long time we'd agreed we would do it together. And then when I asked him, he freaked out, and then he just disappeared for like a year, like literally 12 months. And then, you know, came back and just sort of was like, said to me, it was really full on and I wasn't ready and I didn't know. And I was like, so you could have told me that you weren't ready. But I guess that was, I mean, I'm like, I sort of picked up on the fact that you weren't ready because you just went AWOL for 12 months. And yeah, but that was really sad because we were, you know, it affected our friendship, obviously. And I was really wary of that happening again. So then we started looking the second time a bit more peripherally, you know, like putting the word out there. And then, you know, peripherally kind of met this guy who was interested in being a donor. And we got very close, as in like we'd done a few insemination cycles. And then we became really obviously friends, close with him, as you do when you kind of go through these processes, even though we hadn't known him that well before. And then he turned around and said to us, you know, I've got something I need to tell you. And he basically had like very late in life onset of first episode of schizophrenia. And yeah, which is a really obviously difficult kind of thing. And then we kind of had to have a conversation with him and between ourselves about like, what does this mean? Because, you know, yeah, it's challenging. Like, I think, you know, the ethics of it, I found really hard because I was sort of like, if I was in a relationship with this person and they had, you know, late life onset schizophrenia, like that's one thing to kind of be like, well, you choose to still have a child with that person potentially because you're together and because you'd intended to have children together and because, you know, the genetics of schizophrenia are not, you know, absolute.
For me, I'd just be going up.
Yeah.
No matter what, because the genetic lottery of life, that's not very good.
It's a very difficult thing to live with, you know, like it's a significant morbidity to give to someone if you give it to them. And so, and I guess for us seeing what he went through as well, you know, it just sort of, yeah, it was heartbreaking for us to see him going through what he went through. And, you know, he actually has become very stable on medication and he's doing really well now. But in the end, like, you know, we had to make this decision about in a sense, you're in a transactional relationship with this person where you can choose to kind of be like, okay, maybe this isn't meant to be and this is not the right kind of thing to do. And so we decided, you know, to kind of, and he said that he would understand, obviously be really sad, but understand if that was our decision. And so, you know, we made that decision not to proceed. And then, and we're still friends with him. You know, he's still in our lives. But again, I guess it's changed our relationship. And then third time lucky, we decided, because we'd been honestly at it for years at this point, to kind of just, we were like, we need to ask someone, we need to, like, if we could choose anyone, who would it be? Let's just ask the person that we most want to ask, that it doesn't matter if we care if they're going to say yes or no or what happens, we should just ask them because we've got nothing to lose at this point. And so like we had this gorgeous mutual friend, more of a friend of my partner's than mine, that she knew through like queer community kind of activism. They're on boards of directors together and stuff. And he is a gorgeous man. And, you know, we just kind of, it is such a weird thing really to ask someone to do this with you. You know, it's like a very strange, like, I can't think of many parallel situations of kind of asking someone that's you're friends with, but not really, but like then want to ask them to do this incredibly intimate thing with you that's going to tie you together for the rest of your lives in a weird way.
That's a weirdly clinical process too, you know.
And then it's a really clinical process.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So then you actually do it very divorced from each other. But then at the same time, it's sort of like, it's like bumping uglies, but like with lots of other people involved. And, you know, I don't know what, there were things involved at his end I don't want to know about. But essentially we just like, well, let's ask him, you know, we sent him a message like, oh, can we went and had a beer, like, you know, in Newtown Beer Garden, and sort of, you know, had this really awkward, like, we're wondering if, you know, you would ever be interested. And he was like, you know, I would love to. And I never thought anyone would ask me. Like, I never thought that I'd have children. I never thought anyone would ask me this. Like, you know, he's just like some gay man with cats. Like, he didn't really, and he was quite happy. Like, you know, he never thought it was something he necessarily wanted. I don't know if he'd given it that much thought. And anyway, we were like, oh, well. So we embarked on the process. And yes, now we have 2 children together. And he comes and visits us. He not so much last year, obviously, because of COVID. He lives in Canberra and we live in Albury. So, but he's very much in contact with the kids, and they have a lovely. They're growing into having a relationship with each other that's aside from us, which is super nice. And I think what we really, it's what we really wanted, right? You know, we wanted someone, and we were very clear with him about this, that we wanted someone who was willing to have a child turn up on their doorstep with, you know, at 14 or whatever, who's like, I hate my mothers and, you know, I need to live with you, and just be cool with that, and just kind of be like, all right, well, come in. Let's see what we can figure out. And, you know, he's very, like, he dotes on the kids, and then he gets to go home to his cats and his quiet house. And, you know, he likes that. He's like, I've got the best of both worlds. You know, he's like Mr. Popular, loving kind of Dunkel figure, and then he gets to have his private life, and he gets to have his hobbies, and he, like, every time he comes to visit us, he's like, oh my god, your life is fucked. Like,
I love the idea of him being a Dunkel. That's a great word.
Dunkel, donor uncle, that was his kind of, he came up with it.
So Amy, you mentioned that you live in Albury, and you obviously, as a baby doctor, did you choose to do more rural medicine rather than, you know, sort of be in a main town or city?
I came into med school through the rural pathway, so because I had kind of grown up in rural areas as my parents, and so I don't know, I kind of went for that because it's a little bit of an easier way to get in. Like, they knock off a few marks for people who come in rural entry. So I thought, oh yeah, I'll just take any help I could get, really, at this point, thinking I wasn't going to get in at all. But I guess I grew up in the country, and even though I spent lots of my kind of early adulthood and adulthood in the city, I don't feel like I'm a city person, you know, like I love the country. I'm very outdoorsy. I really like hiking and like cycling, but I also I like country people, and I like kind of being out of the city. very mercenarily, I really like living out here now because it's just, there's no commuting, which gives you heaps more time with your family, which is super precious when you work like 14 hours a day in the hospital. So like, but I think I never probably would have seen myself working in the city. Like, I'm happy to go and do some training in the city, and I think most doctors do spend time in tertiary centres, and I think, you know, you should if you can, because you get exposure to different things, right? And you have, you know, different kind of specialties around you, and, you know, potentially more support, and I don't know, you get a different experience. But I see myself practicing rurally, and I think I always kind of have, and particularly probably cemented since I came out I had to come out and do at least a year of my medical school in one of the rural campuses. And so I decided to do the last 2 years because, you know, I don't really want to uproot everyone for like 1 year and then go back to the city. And so we came out here, and we just really like it here. It's really, really, it's a great place to live. The kids obviously love it here, but for me, it's just the right kind of level. It's really good as a junior doctor to work in a rural hospital because you get heaps of kind of hands-on experience and exposure to stuff. You know, I think there's this real paradox where people think, oh, if you work in a rural hospital, you'll never see anything because it's boring, you know, like it's a backwater and you're only going to see interesting medicine in the city. But everyone who ends up in a tertiary centre from outside of a metropolitan area has come from a peripheral hospital, you know, so we triage all these people and they get retrieved by the helicopter and taken to Melbourne, but like we see it all. And then we've got lots of generalist kind of rotations here. So you just see everything. Whereas if you're in the city and you do a medical term, you don't actually do general medicine. You do very specialized, like you'll do cardiology or you do neurology or you'll do like kidneys, and you just do that for 10 weeks as opposed to like, you know, for me, I do 10 weeks of like literally you could see anything every day. And that's really good for your kind of your early learning when you're like a junior doctor and you haven't seen anything. Like I think it's quite cool. And we live in we work in really small kind of teams, and you get to know everyone. Everyone knows you in the hospital, and I really like that. I think it's really nice. I think some people don't probably like that and would prefer the anonymity of working in a tertiary centre, but I really enjoy, and I especially value it at the moment where, like I told you before, I don't know what I'm doing half the time, and I really need to know. I need to be able to ring the pharmacy and like say, you know, is X person there who I know is not going to laugh at me if I ask her a really dumb question, or like, can you please come around to the ward and help me write up an iron infusion because I really don't want to do the wrong thing, kind of thing. I really like that, and I don't know, I love the kind of team environment of the hospital. I love the nurses. They've got the blackest sense of humor. They've seen everything, and they have no like fucks left to give. It's the greatest.
That's really cute. I'm just imagining it takes a village to raise a baby doctor.
It absolutely does, seriously. And we would all be in deep strife without the pharmacists, the allied health, and the nurses who have so far taught me everything that I know. And the ICU, oh my God, the ICU nurse, she's amazing.
My cousin's one of those. They know all sorts of stuff.
They know everything. She's the best. And she's very calm. I just ring her and be like, hey, I'm a bit worried about this person. Could you just come down and have a look at them? And she comes down and she's like, oh, yes. She's like ringing the ICU. Just put this person on the radar. But it's like, it's all good. You've got it under control. That's what you need.
That is absolutely fabulous. And I think that's a really good note to end on. So thanks so much, Amy. Thanks, Annie.
No worries.
Lovely to see you. And so glad that we finally got to do this and have this conversation.
That was awesome. Thank you, Amy. It felt like typically with these conversations as well, we always go, yeah, it'd be great. And then it literally goes in seconds. So that felt like about 5 minutes of a chat.
It went so quickly. I can't believe it's 9:30.
Have alcohol.
I know, and you didn't even hardly get to talk.
That's a sign of a good chat, though.
All right.
Yeah,
then.
sorry about that.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for watching.
Bye.